I am so excited to share that we have reached 400 episodes. As I like to do, I wanted to share clips from a few of the episodes that were part of the last 50 shows I've shared. There are a lot of informative tips that you'll hear from the following clips.
Welcome to Biz Help for You, the show that saves you the expensive learning curve by providing advice from industry experts in every facet of the entrepreneurial journey. Too many small businesses collapse. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 20% fail within their first year, and less than 35% make it to their 10th anniversary. The goal of this podcast is to change that statistic. So if you're interested in learning more to be a successful entrepreneur, tune in today.
Andrea Johnson discusses how to move from imitating other people's principles and priorities, what she calls disempowered leadership, to defining your own for sustainable, impactful, magnetic leadership. As business owners, we need to avoid imitating others and find what is important to us so that we can be our authentic selves. Well, I know we're going to talk core values today, obviously. And a lot of people, when they start a business, they don't think like I should really think through the core values that I want to embody in my company or those who I hire. They're thinking I need to provide a service or create my product. I need to start marketing. I need to start getting revenue, and they don't really think through all of this. But why do you say that the core values are crucial for the entrepreneurial success and how they can impact the growth and sustainability of a business?
Well, Candy, a lot of us come up through the ranks of high school or college or even a business like me leaving the university medical system. And we imitate other people's principles and priorities, whether we mean to or not. It may be conditioning. It may be, well, this is how you do it. And there are some that we need to imitate. I'm also a profit first practitioner. So I know that there are things that I need to imitate. But a lot of times we start a business, especially a solopreneur, and we go in, especially a service business, we go into that kind of business. And the goal is to do it in our way. Right. Otherwise, we would do it in somebody else's company. Right. So the goal is to do it in my way. Well, if I don't know who I am and what I really stand for, then I can't really do it my way. Most of us gravitate towards working within in ways that honor our core values, but we don't always know what they are. And so it's a little bit like a stopped clock that's right twice a day or a blind squirrel finding a nut. We're like, oh, that was really good. How can I replicate it? And we don't know how. Right. And we don't understand why we got to that place. So when we understand our core values and know who we are, then we can translate those into business mission and values. And it gives us the authority to act within the convictions that we have. It may be that one of the reasons why we become an entrepreneur is because we don't want to do it the way somebody else did it, or I need a different business ethic. But it also means, like I shared, that I can enjoy and be empowered by my work because I'm doing work that honors my core values. It also gives me the ability to set boundaries, which most of us need to learn how to do, especially as entrepreneurs. So I think that fulfillment and understanding is incredibly important. And then being able to take them as a solopreneur or a small business owner and translate them into what does it mean and how is that going to show up in the way I do my business, I think is super important.
In the episode, Small Business Tax Planning Strategies, Leland Gross shares how to calculate what you should pay to avoid penalties and interest and the stress of worrying that the tax man may come looking for you. He also shares what self-employment tax is and that although it's complex, it offers opportunities for tax savings as well. Well, I know we are talking to the small business owner, and a lot of them get confused sometimes on taxes and deductions and all of these things too. So I first would love you to talk about self-employment tax. What is it and why is it important for those professionals to understand and manage it effectively?
Yeah. Self-employment tax. Well, I'll first start by saying, as an entrepreneur, you have the most tax complexity of the everyday humans in the US or just really in any tax code. But in finance, anytime there's complexity, there's also lots of opportunity. And self-employment tax is one of those key pieces of complexity and opportunity where you can really save a lot of money. I tell people that they should tip their server, not the IRS, but self-employment self-employed professionals tend to be the ones tipping the IRS by overpaying in things like self-employment tax. So
Mhm.
for every W-2 employee, they pay FICA tax. They pay their Social Security, their Medicare. It's roughly 7.5% of their pay goes to their public benefits. But what most people don't know is that their employer also pays that same amount for them on their behalf. So for each Social Security number, there has to be about 15.3% in social benefits taxes, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, sent to the government on their behalf. Well, when you are employer, employee all in one, you are on the hook for both halves of that. So for the same amount of money, you pay double the FICA tax in the form of self-employment tax as an entrepreneur. And so that part is really not fun for most people. It can really put a drain on people. In fact, I see a lot of folks whose income tax, their weighted income tax is less than their self-employment tax. And so it can really create some drag on their cash flow. And that's why it's so important to find ways to pay that efficiently and reduce that as much as possible.
Mhm. Well, it's so true. A lot of people don't even know that they're supposed to be paying that and don't know they need to be making those payments throughout the year even, right? It's not like a W-2 where it comes out every time you're paid and you don't have to worry about it. And so I think a lot of people get into trouble because they don't realize everything they're supposed to be doing and making those payments. So do you have suggestions for them to maybe put that on a calendar? Like, how do you tell them to manage that to make sure, first of all, they're saving enough for tax and also
Mhm.
making sure they're paying it on time?
Yeah. I find that most entrepreneurs did not get into business because they like figuring out how to pay their own taxes or working nights and
Right.
they like what they do. They love working in their business, but the business stuff scares them. And so I have
Mhm.
clients who tell me, I'm afraid that one day a group of men in suits are going to come knock on my door and haul me away to jail because I did something wrong with my taxes. It just
Mhm.
creates a lot of anxiety because there's a lack of education.
Marshall Dar shares how you can give tax-free medical reimbursements in the episode, How to Navigate Health Benefits Compliance. There's no minimum contribution or participation required. This is also something to consider if you have staff in multiple locations and it's difficult to find coverage. Tune in to this clip to hear more on this topic. Well, and I think what I found interesting and what you were just saying too is when you said that employers could give the cash tax free. Because I know years and years ago, it used to be you could give reimbursements and it wasn't taxable. And then the IRS changed it. Like if you provide insurance through your company and you're withholding, from your employee their portion of the premium and you pay the difference. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's pre-tax, but if you just give a reimbursement, that becomes taxable income. So,
Mhm.
for it to be able to be given to them tax-free is a benefit, but kind of a surprise too, because of how the rules have changed over the years.
Yeah, and it really spun out of updated HRA legislation back in 2020. And part of why I started Stretch Dollar was I was seeing a lot of larger companies with some health insurance brokers figure it out up there. And I was like, if it can work up there, I really feel like there's an opportunity for small businesses just to have a simple, flexible offering. There's no minimum contribution and no minimum participation either. So it
Mhm.
really is an offering that you can customize to your budget.
Well, that's perfect too. Just from my experience, I used to have an office in California and all my
Mhm.
staff were there. And the plans that I could get for one, like I said, it was expensive. The employees were even saying too, gosh, it's going to cost me so much and I'm going to have such little coverage. But we
Mhm.
also had to have, like I said, a minimum participation. And generally, most of the time, we couldn't meet that because some people were maybe still on family plans or
Mhm.
a spouse had insurance or whatever the situation was. So where you're saying too there's not that minimum is also a benefit so that the employers can offer that and be able to meet whatever requirements exist. So that's
Yeah.
interesting to hear from you too.
Yeah. We were actually the first company on Stretch Dollar ourselves. And part of that was my co founder's in California, and she had always been on a Kaiser plan. She loves Kaiser justifiably. It's a great plan if you live near a Kaiser, but there's
Mhm.
no Kaiser in Philadelphia where I live. And so there wasn't really a pathway for both of us to get coverage that we would want and would want to use. But with Stretch Dollar, I was feeling a bit generous and I was just like, okay, everybody can get $400 a month. Pick the plans you want. And so she's on a Kaiser, I'm on a Highmark. We have another employee in Chicago on a Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois, and then another in Texas. And everybody's able to get what they want, which is really hard to do with traditional group plans.
In this next clip, I shared the interview I did with Beth Blaney discussing Clockwork, which started me on my journey to implement it in my own company. And now I'm certified to help others create operational efficiency so they can take an unplugged vacation. Beth was so excited about the program. Listen in to find out why. I originally found out about Clockwork through a podcast interview I did with Beth Blaney, now Beth Carter. I'll share the link to the full interview in the resources details for this episode, but let me share a short clip of our conversation where she explains how she found out about the book and how she felt after reading it.
So the very first chapter I read, I literally felt like he was living in my house, watching me every day. It was I'm working 1 million hours a week. I'm drained. I'm this, I'm that. And just all the things that we go through as entrepreneurs.
Right.
And the rest of the book, it's very similar to E-Myth in terms of building a business, not a job. That's another great book, by the way, Build a Business, Not a Job. And I read this book and it just sparked something in me. And then in Clockwork, he talks about taking a 4-week vacation.
Wow.
And the whole idea is being able to build your business and systemize so that you can step away from it. It's not just about taking a vacation. It's about being able to choose what you want to do, when you want to do it, being able to take time off, being able to, let the business run without you. And then I, of course, circled back with that CPA and said, oh my gosh, I read that book. Life-changing. I need to start. What do I do?
I thought what she was saying about taking a 4-week vacation sounded amazing, but I wasn't sure how to begin. She had mentioned the book Clockwork by Mike Michalowicz. I was familiar with him as I'd read and implemented Profit First in my company. In that book, he asked us to send him an email, and I was on his list. Just after my interview with Beth, I received an email from Mike saying he was updating Clockwork and he was looking for some people to read the book and leave a review once the book was released. Having just heard about this book right before getting that email, I knew I wanted to participate. I was able to get an advanced copy and read it. I recognized I needed to begin to implement in my business what I was reading about. It's not really because I wanted a 4-week vacation, although that sounds fabulous. It was that I knew that I was the bottleneck in my business, and I was afraid that if I had to step away for any reason, that there would be a problem. In the episode, Improve Employee Confidence by Relying on Guided Knowledge, Greg DeVore explains what happens when people keep information in their heads and what happens when someone else needs to do the work and doesn't have the details necessary. He explains what tribal knowledge is and the problems that arise from it. I think that's important too, because a lot of times people might even have the knowledge, but they're still afraid to do something on their own. They want to make sure, am I doing this right? Get the pat on the back, or just, they're risk averse. And so I think where you're saying too, having both people acknowledge that that is something that's been transferred and they're confident is, a good point really to have on there too. So do you see that a lot?
Well, you'll see all the times you have kind of both extremes. You have that employee who thinks they know what they're doing, but they're skipping steps, they're making mistakes because they're working from memory. And then you have on the opposite extreme, the person who's, tried really hard to learn a lot of information, but there's so much to keep in their head. They're constantly fearful of making mistakes. And maybe they've made a big mistake in the past, so now they're really gun shy. And so if they're doing it on their own, they're nervous. Most of the time they're asking, did I do this right? Or what do I do here? How do I do this? And it really can bog down the business when you're working in that environment.
Mhm. And at the end of your bio, it said tribal knowledge, right? So I would love for you to share your definition too on what is tribal knowledge and what is the impact on businesses that rely on it.
Tribal knowledge is really, it's all the information that we keep in our heads. So we always look at, okay, if somebody had to do a task in your business, how would they know how to do that? And if the answer is they're going to, go to Tom or to Karen, then that's a business that's relying on tribal knowledge.
Mhm.
You can have documentation and still be a tribal knowledge business. So you might have a whole bunch of, here's our SOPs. But if the employee, when they don't know what to do, doesn't go to those SOPs, they're still going to another person, then the business is still relying on tribal knowledge. And it creates problems of consistency. It creates problems of confidence. It creates problems with independence of employees and efficiency. I mean, when I have to ask someone, how do I do this every time? It slows everything down. So every task or transaction ends up costing the business much more money.
Right. Well, because when you're interrupted too, so even if number one, you're the person who has to go back and ask again because you don't remember all the steps, but now the person you're asking is also being interrupted, so they aren't able to completely focus on what they were doing. Now they answer your question. Now they have to get back into what they were doing before and get back in that mindset too. So it's not just that brief, quick question. It really impacts things like to a larger scale than most people probably even think about. Eric Grafstam shares what happens if you are the key employee and what happens when you want to exit your business. Learn about the downfall of owner dependency and what can happen in your business if it can't run without you. One of the challenges too, just from my perspective, and I would love to have your insights on this too, is the owner is often that key employee. So if they're going to sell and they're not there any longer, it makes it harder for someone who wants to maybe buy it but not really operate it the same way to be able to sell it. So how does somebody, figure out that challenge and make it where they're not really the business?
Yeah, and owner dependency is a big thing. A lot of times with service-based businesses. So if you're running an accounting firm or maybe a law firm or something that's service-oriented, the good news is you probably develop a fantastic reputation. Clients really enjoy working with you. They trust you. But moving somebody into that business who may have a similar skill set does create some uncertainty and doubt. And so, are you the business is one of the questions that we'll ask an owner, which is, look, if the business requires you to spend more than 40 hours a week in it, really 30 hours a week in it, you've got to look at how do you adjust that. Now, this doesn't include if you love what you do and you've got a team and you've got processes and you've got things in place and you just like working in the business and you're doing a whole variety of things, that is different. So this is a bit nuanced. So I want to make sure everybody understands that. But if the business cannot run without you, then somebody who's acquiring this may or may not be interested or may not even have the skill set or the licensing, for example, to work in the business day to day. So they've got to replace you. And so that factors into what they are willing to pay for it. Or they may say, look, I don't want to buy a job. I already have a job. I want a business that I can grow and build a team around. So owner dependency is one of the top things that, not only do you need to consider, but, you're not going to find a replacement for a very active owner within days, weeks, or months. It's probably going to take some time to get that person into the business, which is, again, back to your earlier point, why it's so critical for people to start thinking about this, in advance.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and the look back that we did on some of the clips in the past 50 shows. I would love for you to share this with anyone you know who would find it helpful. And thank you for your continued support. Thank you for tuning in today. Would you please share this episode with those you know and leave a review on your favorite platform? And if you find our show informative, would you consider being a financial sponsor to help me continue my mission to educate business owners? A link is located in the episode description, and no amount is too small. I'd really appreciate your support. If you are interested in connecting with our guest and receiving the offer they had to share, a link to our resource page is in the show notes. Finally, if you have any bookkeeping or payroll needs, reach out to us at 310-534-5577 or contact@abandp.com. My team and I are eager to assist you. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Biz Help for You. Please join your host, Candy Messer, again next time. Have a terrific day.